All right, everyone, welcome back. And in this video, what we're going to be doing is adding win streaks to our scene so that it looks like the force around Ryu is kind of being concentrated into the Hadouken that we have here. So to get started with that, let's just take a look again at the Hadouken that we made. And I'm going to actually go ahead and change a bit of these things around, because I think what we can do is actually work with less here instead of the amount of spheres that we have to make the electric detail. So I'm going to delete a few of these and bring some around so that they look a little bit more in place with the look of our work here. There we go. So I'm going to delete a few of these here as well. All right. So let's see this now, and it's getting there. All right, it's looking better. Let me just go ahead and adjust some of this. All right. And I think this works pretty well. Let me just go ahead and close some of these a little bit better. All right. And I think that works. So that'll be pretty good for the Hadouken. You can see some of the electricity is on his hands. And you can see it kind of centralizing in the center of the Hadouken. Let's go ahead and add one more. Copy that, put that around the center palm, right around there. And increase the size. And there we go. So, awesome. That's pretty good. And we'll move on from here. So, to get started on the win streaks that we were talking about, what I'm going to start with is making a curve. So, I'll do that by going over to Add, Curve, Bezier. There we are. And with this Bezier, you can't really see it, so let's go out of the shading editor and come over to the regular workload, or workflow, sorry. And let's just press S to scale, and there it is. So now you can see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to the top-down view. I'm going to move this by edit mode. I'm going to turn on the snapping to increments with absolute grid snap. So what this will do is it'll just kind of snap into place the textures that I have here. So let's do this. Actually, let's turn this around, because I'm pretty sure this point is the front and this point's the end. And I'll show you why in a second, why that's important. There you go. And then let's rotate this to kind of center it out and bring this around here. There we go. Absolute grid snaps on. Okay. And then let's extrude this one out to around here. And then we'll bring this a little bit more forward, scale it down a little bit so it looks more circular. There you go. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with the look of this curve to make it look like it's a streak of wind. So what we can get started with is coming over to the object data properties of this spline. We'll go over to the geometry tab and then just turn on the extrusion. And as soon as we do, you can notice that the extrusion is working to make a kind of card. So basically the spline is being extruded up and down. If we go into edit mode, we can see the center of the spline is right in the middle. This lets us affect anything that we kind of want. So now if we start moving it, you can see it starts updating the extrusion we made. So it basically looks like a kind of card or a ribbon. And that's what we'll be using for this specifically. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and kind of pose out the spline so it looks like it's facing inward into the Hadouken here. There we go. And then I'm going to bring this one down. And then this one I'm going to rotate. I'm going to bring this a little closer and this one a little bit more to the edge. And we're going to scale these down. Oh, whoops, accidentally used the wrong key. I'm going to scale this down just so that they work a little bit better. All right. That looks pretty good, and we'll work with that. So, with that done, let's go ahead and start making the texture that we'll use, and I'll show you in a second kind of the work we can do with it. So, let me just add another spline and do the same kind of idea. There's the air. There we go. Let me scale this out. Let me just put it to the side here really quick. And then do the same extrusion. Set to 0.5. All right, and we'll work with that one as well. So, to get started, if we take a look at the UVs of this spline, there's not really any, because it doesn't really exist. And that's going to be kind of important for the texture we're going to make, because we're going to use the UVs of this ribbon to texture or make a shader based off of its texture, or UVs, which is going to be the square. So a way I can show you how to do that is by selecting this, right-clicking, and convert to mesh. Now, if we go into edit mode, you can see that there is UVs, and if we select all of them, there they are, showing up in basically the UV space. So this is what we need, because we're going to go ahead and make a texture or a shader based off of this UV map that you see right here. So let's go to the shading. There we are. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make a new texture. We'll call this wind. And before we begin, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the blend mode to alpha blend and leave the show back faces on. And I'll turn the shadow mode to none. For this texture, it's going to be actually pretty similar to the shaders that we made before. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these textures, or the shaders right here. And I'm going to go ahead and add new shaders, basically pretty similar to what we've made. So let's add a mixed shader right here. There we go. And you know what? Let me turn off the snapping really quick. There we are. I'm going to connect the surface right there. There we are. And we're going to make another transparent and a emission. Here we are. And we'll leave these as the same color. We're not going to make it white or sorry, not white. We're not going to make it blue, kind of like a Hadouken. We kind of need this to be its own other thing. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the strength to a very low number, not like we have with the rest of the textures here. I'm going to leave it at 4 because we don't want this to be too strong. As we kind of go ahead and finish with this shader, it's going to need its own emission so that it lights up properly, but it's not going to be strong enough to where it causes a glow effect on everything else. So with that ready, what I'm going to start with first is the gradient that we're going to have. So the idea will be the gradient's going to cause a streak from total black to total white. So the end back here will be completely dark, and then the front of this ribbon is going to be completely white. When it's going to be set with that kind of work or that kind of setting, anything that's dark or gets darker will disappear, meaning that we won't be seeing about maybe this much over here, and it'll slowly gradually show itself as it gets closer to the front, which is where we're kind of pointing the Hadouken. So to kind of get around to there, let's start with a gradient texture, which again is kind of what I'm talking about. Shift A, texture, gradient texture. There we are. And I'm going to do the same method of pressing Control T to make this texture coordinate with a mapping node. But instead of going to object, we're going to go to UV right here. I'm going to go ahead and connect that to the vector. And I'm going to use the gradient texture to connect over to the transparency. So I'll go here, like so. And you're not seeing anything yet because we need to establish how this will look in a second. So I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go ahead and add a color ramp. And instead of the color going into the transparency, I'm going to start with just an alpha. I'm going to go ahead and bring the alpha to around here and leave the white right about where it is. And let's leave that for now. So clearly nothing's happening yet, but you'll see in a second. So what we're going to start with over here then is making the look of the texture, which is using the Voronoi textures that we've been using. I'm going to go to Shift A, Texture, Voronoi. There we are. And then I'm going to duplicate this one. Oh, before we do, let me switch this to 4D and move this up a little bit. There we are. And then switch the F1 here to F smooth, or smooth F1. There we go. And we're going to add a math node. So I'm going to go over to Shift A. There we go. Converter, math, and switch this to subtract. And I'm going to connect the distance kind of outputs right here to there. It's basically kind of what we've been using before. I'm going to go ahead and make another math node, make this multiply, so that we can multiply the work of the gradient to the texture here. And for this purpose, let's just start with color. And as you can already see, we're seeing some results. And there we go. So as you can see, we're starting to get some gradient work happening here. But I want to push it a little bit further and add a gradient or a color in the middle. What this is going to do, as the lower I bring it, the more gradient is going to show up for the end. And I want something kind of like that. So there we go. Now we're using kind of the full use of the shader here, of multiplying it and then connecting the two together like so. But I also want to use a color ramp here to kind of tighten the look, but we don't need this middle gradient right here anymore. So we'll just focus on these. I'm going to go and use something pretty similar like this so that the texture is going to be much more clear and much more sharp than the gradient. So it's going to look similar to this, but we're going to add a few more things to make it look a little bit more exaggerated and look like wind. So with the Voronoi that we made, I'm going to do the Shift T once more, and I'm going to bring this out because we're going to kind of follow the same style for the electricity with this wind. We're going to change a few things to get a better look going. And there we go. So Switching this to UV is already exaggerating the look of the texture itself to look more like a streak of wind. I'm going to go ahead and add a value and bring this in for the scale. And let's start with 1, see how that looks. Let's try 2. Ooh, that looks pretty nice. So now we can see multiple streaks of wind kind of going in and making it look like it's not just one strand, but multiple strands. And that's kind of what I want to make with this. So we have the texture coordinates working for one piece, but we need to make it work for some other pieces. I'm going to go ahead and copy the value that we used and kind of do the same thing that we did with the electricity shader and just plug this in for the W and then plug this in for the scale. All right, so that's a little too exaggerated. I want to bring this W down to 0.4 and the value, let's try 1. Oh, wow. We got one big streak of wind there, but that's not bad. It actually looks kind of nice. We just need to figure out what to do with it so we can kind of understand how this texture will work. And I actually kind of like this a lot. All right, well, anyways, before we, get stuck with just one look, I'm going to go ahead and add a noise texture. Input, texture, and noise. And then we're going to add a mix RGB. Color, mix RGB. And then we're going to use linear light. I'm going to connect the color over to color 2, and then the mapping to color 1. And then I'm going to connect this mapping to the vector for noise. And then the factor, let's put it to 0.2. From here, I'll connect the linear light node to the vector for the Voronoi and the other Voronoi that we have. So now this is actually looking a lot more like wind. We have some streaks going in and out and thinning in certain areas and then growing in certain other areas so that it looks more exaggerated like I was going to say a piece of wind, but more or less a piece of wind. So there we go. And with this, we can go ahead and kind of now start manipulating what we want to get a better look for the texture. So I'm going to come over here to the gradient and see if I can adjust this a little bit more to exaggerate the fading of the wind. So I like that look. It's definitely getting more transparent from the ends. And I think I'll leave it around there. So let's go over to the actual texture here and let's take a look at what we can kind of exaggerate and also sharpen. There we go. And then for the value of the W, or not the value of the W, the value of the mapping, let's go ahead and take a look at this really quick. All right, so that's not bad. That's actually pretty nice. Let me see if we can thicken the detail right here. No, that's fine. We're doing the same thing with the scaling there. The distortion, we can add this if we want, but really, I think the most you would need is a 0.1 or a 0.4. It's adding more detail, but it's not really it's not really necessary. And again, with the factor for the linear light, you can adjust that if you want, but I don't think you really need to. I think it's fine as it is. The value for the W, feel free to change that to what you think looks good. But if you're kind of confused about what you want this to look like, leaving it at, let's say, 0.5 should be fine. The same for the value of the scaling. Go ahead and kind of look for something that you think might look nice. Like a 0.56, that's not bad. And a 1 works as well. So if you want, you can kind of copy this like so. And then come over here to the number to basically make a copy of the wind texture and then put this to 0.5. And there you go. So now you have two different streaks of wind that look very different, even though it's the same texture, so to speak, but you're using two different ones. So now you have a little bit more variety. And from there, I think we're actually good. So now what we can do is we can test this out to see how it looks with the rest of the render. I'm going to bring this a little bit more inward. And let me kind of turn on some of the nodes that we have here. There we go. And that looks kind of nice. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. And then let's take a look at how this looks like in rendered view. All right, so it's not bad, but I think we're in Eevee. Yep, we're in Eevee. So let's see what this looks like in cycles. There we are. And this is actually looking pretty good. Let's lower the sampling because we don't really need to have it sample that much. If you can kind of tell over here, it's sampling already 128 samples out of 1,000. We're just looking at this from the viewport to see if it looks good, like if it works. We don't need to spend that much time rendering out for the purpose of testing. So we'll just leave the rendering in viewport to 128 and turn off denoising because that's just more work that we don't really need. And we could focus on actually making sure this looks nice. So what I'm going to do with the electricity is just kind of increase the emission of it so that it looks a little bit more brighter. So I'm going to bring the strength to 150. And then for the rest of the Hadouken, let's just kind of take a look at this. It actually looks pretty good. I think if anything, we might need to lower some of the emissiveness, but for the most part, that's not too bad. All right, so I'm going to go over to rendered mode. All right, just give it a second because it's working pretty hard. I'm going to go ahead and grab this spline or this curve. Let's see if we can add the texture here. And the thing we can also do is apply that same texture to this curve. Now, I could have shown you how to make it kind of regardless without the UVs, but the reason why I brought the whole UVs thing up was so that you could see, if you look right around here, you can see how it's actually affecting the texture itself. If we changed, say, like the object, even a part of this, it wouldn't work. And yeah, it wouldn't look, I think, that good. So regardless, let me kind of switch this to material preview so we're not wasting as much energy. We can go ahead now and use the curves to make some extra wind to go with this. So let's go into top view. Let's take a look at the curve right here. And let's go ahead and make some of the wind textures now. All right, so before we move on any further, what I want to start doing now is kind of setting up my camera shot so that I can then focus on what we have here. So the nice thing about the camera shot is that we can actually use two views, one of us in the scene we're working on, and then the other one of the preview of the camera. So for my scene, I actually do have a camera already set up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, come over to this section and kind of close anything I don't need. And more or less turn off everything. And I'm going to go to view, camera view, view camera selection. Oh, I haven't selected. I thought I did. Strange. Ah, right. I actually had to turn off the selection. There we go. View, camera selection. And I'm not really sure why it's not working. Am I in edit mode? Is that why? There we go. I apologize because I completely forget when I'm in edit mode and object mode. Anyways, so here we are. And here's the camera for our scene. So what I can do from here is just turn on the render view. Give it a second. And now we can see what this looks like in camera view while working on it from over here. So I'm going to go ahead and just move the camera a little bit so it centers in the scene. A little bit more. There we go. And I'm going to zoom in so that we can focus on what we're working on. So that's looking pretty good. What I can do from here now is start using some of the curves to exaggerate this all here. Like so. And there we go. So now we can kind of get a little crazy with the look of this. And we'll kind of, from here, move on to making some streaks going around Ryu and into the Hadouken. So let's go in and let's just start adding some more curves to this scene. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of fix these around. That's pretty good. And then we'll just go in, duplicate, maybe scale it down a little bit. And then something smaller and kind of complement that look right there. There we go. All right, that looks pretty nice. And with that, what I can do is add the other wind texture to it. Well, okay, now I'm realizing what's happening. I need to deselect that. And I'll just add another curve here. The curve, Bezier, extrude out. Let's add the other wind texture. No, not that one. There you go. Wind 01. And let's extrude this out into 0.5. Sorry, not 0.5, 0.05. So, there we are. I'm going to go ahead and put this in. Like so. Oh, it's not bad. Let's exaggerate the angle a little bit. There we go. All right, there we go. That looks nice. And then I'll just finish off with kind of putting it going into the Hadouken. And I think that about covers that detail. And then I'll make another one kind of on the opposite side right here. There we go. I'm gonna grab this one and actually readjust it now. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now let's add another another curve. Let's do the same thing, extrude to 0.05. Let's give this the wind texture. And let's see, where can we put this guy? Let's see. I think what we can do is have him kind of come up in the corner over here. Like so. Let me scale this in. And bring this one a little bit, well, actually, a little bit more in like that. Scale it in. And then let's work on the curve here. Now that we did that, let's go ahead and move this one a little bit more to the left. All right. Let me bring this down. And I'm not a big fan of it kind of crossing over his face. So we'll do instead, let's bring this up a little bit more. And have it kind of run behind him. There we go. That looks pretty good. And then with that done, I'm going to go ahead and copy this right there, rotate it, and kind of have it go in the same direction as this wind texture I just made. And already, as you can see, because we're using different textures, because we're using different textures, we're getting some interesting results here of the look of our mesh. I'm going to go ahead and grab the first one we made, copy it, kind of rotate it so that it looks like it's kind of coming from the ground. And yep, it's kind of clipping into the fist right there. Let's go ahead and do that. And then let me see where that other piece of wind is. There we are. I'm going to go ahead and just redirect this a little bit better. All right, there we go. That's actually, oh, whoops, I accidentally moved it. So that's looking actually pretty good. I think what we can do is just add a few more wind streaks, and these will be kind of smaller ones. Help point into the right direction where this wind is coming. And I'll hide this right behind the fist, or the hand, a little bit more. There we go. So, all in all, it's actually looking really nice. I think what we have here is actually a pretty good indication of the style that we have for this piece. Let me just set the origin for this a little bit better. Rotate it around and get what we want. There we go. And I'm thinking this one here needs to be fixed a little bit. Yeah. Because we actually affected the origin, we also affected the other origin of this piece. So we'll just kind of put it back to where it went. All right, there we go. It's getting there. Just angle it a little bit more. There we go. So that's looking pretty good. I think one more streak just kind of near the bottom of the bicep, and that should be it. There we go. Bring it right around here. And then what I want to do with this one specifically, I want to convert it into a mesh. So that then I can come in here, snap these two to the center. And that way kind of exaggerate the look so it's not just flat, but it has an angle to it. Like it's actually in motion to going into the ball, which most of the other ones are already kind of in there. So now that we kind of see this preview and we kind of like the look that we have for it, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and go over to the Hadouken, go to inner. Let me change the strength to this, see if I like it. All right, so I'll leave it at 30. I'll make it a little bit less saturated. Put it to 0.7. And we'll leave it at that. So with what we have here, I think it's good, and we're ready to just render it and see basically the end of this tutorial. So let's go over and kind of close this off, because we know what the camera looks like already, so we don't have to worry about that. Now, we have everything ready. We can just come over to the settings for the render. And let's see, I want it to save over to the desktop. Accept. And, well, let's name this something. Let's name it Ryu. There we go. And then the dimensions, 1920 by 1080. Everything looks good. PNG, color depth 8, compression 15%. So it's not really compressing a lot. Should be fine. Let's go over to the rendering. So for the render, 4,000. Yeah, I don't think we need that many. We can just work with 512. And then we can go from there, and we'll set the denoise. And then everything else actually is fine. We can set the kind of light paths here to a default of full global illumination. And then we can just hit render. So let's go over to render, render image. And from here, it's going to render from the camera that we have placed, which is kind of why I was saying we don't really need to worry too much now, because as you can see here, it's computing everything before it starts making the render. And there we go. So as you can tell, the sampling count is increasing as we go to 512 samples. Just give it a minute. There we go. So now we're at 60, and it's not going to really show you each and every render sample, so it'll just jump as it goes. But just keep in mind that's kind of how it's going to look as you work on it, and it'll just keep going And as soon as we reach 512, it'll denoise everything to make it a more kind of smoother render. So with all that, I hope you guys had fun. And so once this finishes, I'll show you another thing we can do to basically add more detail to our render, which is going to be using some post-processing effects. Because right now, we see the glow coming from the Hadouken and the rest of the pieces, but we don't have anything actually emitting a glow. Not like how it would be showing in Eevee. So let's just wait for this to finish rendering. All right, we're almost there. Okay, so at this point, it'll probably pause a little bit longer than usual because it's going to denoise everything. And there we are. So we have our finished render. And that doesn't look too bad, but we can push it a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just double click on this. All right, so I want the maximize button to show up on the window. I'm just going to scale this down. Something like this. We're going to go to compositing. And we're going to use nodes. And there we go. So we have render layer and composite. I'm going to press Shift A. And I'm going to go get an input. Or sorry, not input. I'm going to go to output. Viewer, so we can see what this looks like. Like so. So now we can see within the compositor what this will kind of look and what we'll do for it. So what I want to do is I want to use a not a converter, excuse me, a filter to basically help make the emission kind of pop out more. I'm going to go to glare and go over to the viewer, and there we go. So already we're starting to see some change here in the render. And I'm going to go from streaks to fog glow. And if I put this all the way to 1, it's just showing the piece right here, the actual Hadouken. But I'll just leave it at that. I'll increase the size to 9 so it looks more exaggerated. Let's see what this threshold does for us. So it just kind of leaves it at the look it was before when we finished rendering. So this is kind of what it looked like. I'm going to bring, oh, nope, not to 31. A little too much. I'll just bring it to 1. That way you can see the glow from the emission. So let me show you what it looked like before and what it looks like now, adding this post-processing. So there you go. It's just a little bit extra that you can use. And then once you kind of like what you have, you can come over to the image. Should be right around here. Oh, excuse me. The image is here. I have it here. Oh, geez. So yeah. So this is the image with the full render and using the compositing we made. So if I go ahead and just kind of close, or not close this, but if I change this, the image, and go back to the one we have, you can see in the viewer of the compositor, we have the emission, and the actual render we made, it doesn't have the bloom effect that we made. So the composition is basically affecting the image we rendered out, and that's why you had to connect it here. So, excuse me, I was completely confused. I thought I had deleted that, but there it is. So with this here, you can then go to image, save as. I'm going to just name it Ryu Dukin. And there you go. So now, if I wanted to go kind of find it, and come over here to the render, desktop, and there it is. So I hope you liked this tutorial. I had a lot of fun doing it, and I love this kind of stuff. This is really cool to me, and I hope you learned something. So, had a great time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.